All right. So we always talk about, you know, diving deep. And you've really outdone yourself this time, bringing us Meditations by Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah.
We're talking about getting inside the head of a Roman emperor, right?
Yeah.
Like, these are personal journals notes to himself. This isn't some PR campaign from ancient Rome.
Mhm.
This is raw and it's real.
Yeah, what I think is so fascinating is that, these weren't even written for an audience.
Right.
These are his private reflections, many of them jotted down while on military campaigns.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, just imagine that, leading an empire, facing down enemies, and still taking the time for this kind of introspection.
That's wild.
Yeah.
And the kicker here is you've brought not one, but two different translations.
Right.
Which I love, because right off the bat, it reminds us that even with these ancient texts, we're still dealing with interpretations. It adds a layer of how do we know what he really meant?
Absolutely. And, in order to even understand, the weight of his words, I think it's important for us to rewind a bit and just discuss who was Marcus Aurelius, like in the grand scheme of Roman history.
Yeah, I think when most people hear Roman emperors, he's not exactly the first guy, showing up in the gladiator movies every 5 minutes. So what made him so different?
Well, he ruled from 161 to 180 AD during the Pax Romana, a period of relative peace and stability within the Roman Empire. And he was the last of what's often referred to as the five good emperors, who were known for their relatively just and stable rule.
So we've got good emperor and wrote a bunch of deep thoughts. I mean, there's got to be connection there.
Precisely. So you see, with Marcus Aurelius, philosophy wasn't just some intellectual exercise that was reserved just for academics. It was a lived experience, a guide for navigating the complexities of life, and especially as an emperor, with immense responsibility.
Okay, so this isn't just a history lesson. This is like a leadership seminar led by a guy who actually ruled an empire.
Exactly. And even though he lived centuries ago, the challenges that he grappled with, whether it's responsibility, morality, finding peace amidst chaos, these are all incredibly relevant, I think, to all our lives, even today.
Which brings us to the heart of this whole deep dive, which is meditations.
Mm.
What are the key takeaways? What are we going to be looking at? And ultimately, how can we apply these insights from, thousands of years ago to our modern experiences?
Well, one of the central themes that you'll find throughout meditations is this idea, and you've probably heard it before, this idea of living in accordance with nature. Now, this isn't about, pitching a tent and living off the land, although I'm sure Marcus Aurelius probably wouldn't have minded a good hike.
Right. Every time I see nature with a capital N in these translations, I know we're talking about something a little bigger here.
Exactly. For Aurelius, nature represented the rational order of the universe. And I think it's helpful to think of it as this sort of grand cosmic blueprint. Right. And he saw both the physical laws of nature and the moral principles guiding human behavior as part of this overarching order. And he believed that everything, our lives included, unfolded for a reason, even when we can't immediately grasp it.
Okay, so if we're following this cosmic blueprint, how do we figure out what our part is supposed to be?
Well, that's where virtue comes in. And boy, does Aurelius emphasize virtue. Justice, temperance, courage, wisdom. He's constantly reflecting on these qualities.
So it's almost like a virtue checklist.
Yeah.
He's constantly reviewing it, making sure he's aligning himself with this cosmic order.
Exactly. For Aurelius, being virtuous wasn't just about being good. It was about acting in accordance with this rational order of the universe, fulfilling your role in the grand scheme of things.
And let's be clear, he wasn't just talking the talk. I mean, the guy was facing down plagues, wars, betrayals. He even had a rebellion led by his own general. I mean, talk about a high-stakes test for your philosophy.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of what makes meditations so compelling. It's not just theoretical wisdom. This is born out of real-life struggles. He had to find ways to apply these Stoic principles in the most demanding circumstances imaginable.
So for someone like me, who stresses about deadlines and, not empires collapsing, how do those experiences translate?
Well, that's where Aurelius's emphasis on the power of the mind, I think, becomes incredibly relevant. He stresses constantly that while we can't control external events, we can control our reactions to them.
And there's that quote, I think is the Epictetus is in one of our source materials, that says, "Do not suppose you are hurt and your complaint ceases."
Exactly. And I think that highlights how much of our suffering comes from our perceptions, our interpretations of events. Aurelius reminds us that even death, the ultimate uncontrollable, is simply a part of this natural order.
It's like that image he uses of, our minds being this inner fortress.
Yes.
That we can retreat to. We can find peace amidst, the external turmoil. But he takes it a step further, doesn't he?
He does.
It's not just about our own individual peace. It's about how we relate to others.
Precisely. Aurelius continually emphasizes our shared humanity. And again, this wasn't about excusing bad behavior, but recognizing that even those who wrong us are flawed humans just like us.
So in a way, it's like this radical call for compassion and understanding, even in the face of really difficult people and situations.
Exactly. It's about recognizing our interconnectedness as part of this grand cosmic order, even amidst the inevitable conflicts and challenges of life.
Okay, so we've got this cosmic blueprint, this emphasis on virtue, but then there's the reality of Marcus Aurelius' life, right? I mean, the guy talked about peace, but he lived in a time of constant war. He wrote about forgiveness, yet during his reign, there was persecution of Christians.
Yeah, you've hit on, I think, a really fascinating point, which is this paradox of Aurelius. Here's a man who strived for this Stoic ideal, but he was also a product of his time, grappling with these incredibly complex situations.
Right.
And it reminds us that even the most dedicated philosophers aren't immune to the messiness of, just being human.
And it's not just the big historical contradictions. Reading these letters between Aurelius and his tutor, Fronto,
Yes.
it's like getting a peek behind the curtain. Suddenly, he's not just this stoic emperor. He's a guy writing about everyday stuff, even his anxieties.
Those letters offer, I think, such a valuable perspective because, we see his humor, his affection for his family and friends. We even see him struggling with things like writing speeches. Can you imagine being emperor and getting stage fright?
It makes him so much more relatable.
Right.
This is the guy who wrote the book, literally, on controlling your emotions. And he's still getting nervous about public speaking. Okay, maybe this whole Stoicism thing isn't impossible after all.
Exactly. I think that contrast between his public persona and his private writings is just so incredibly humanizing. We all wear different masks, present different versions of ourselves in different contexts.
Sure.
And Aurelius, for all his wisdom and stature, was no exception.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about cosmic blueprints and virtue checklists and the power of the mind. But for our listeners out there, what does it all mean? How do we take these ancient ideas and make them relevant to our own lives, our own struggles?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think the beauty of meditations is that it doesn't really offer any easy answers or a one-size-fits-all approach. It's more like it invites us to grapple with these timeless questions right alongside Marcus Aurelius himself.
It's like he's giving us a framework for thinking, not necessarily a rule book for living.
Exactly. Take his emphasis on virtue, for example. It's not about, achieving some kind of perfect moral purity. It's about striving to align our actions with that bigger picture, with that sense of a rational order to the universe. And it's something that we have to figure out how to do within our own lives, just like he did.
Which, let's be honest, is way easier said than done.
Yeah.
I mean, cultivating virtue in a world that often seems to reward the opposite. Trying to stay true to your principles when it seems like everyone else is cutting corners, it's tough.
Absolutely. And Aurelius acknowledges that. He doesn't shy away from the difficulties, but he also reminds us that the struggle itself is worthwhile. That by focusing on what we can control, our thoughts, our reactions, our commitment to living virtuously, we can find this sense of peace and purpose even amidst all the chaos.
It's like that inner fortress analogy again. It's not about escaping the world. It's about finding that inner strength to face it.
Precisely. And that, I believe, is the enduring legacy of Marcus Aurelius and Meditations. He wasn't some, untouchable sage preaching from on high. He was a man grappling with the same fundamental challenges that we all face. How to live a good life, how to navigate difficult choices, how to find meaning and purpose in a world that often feels random and chaotic. And it's in that struggle and that shared humanity that I think we find the timeless wisdom and inspiration that continue to resonate with readers, all these centuries later.
So the final thought for our listeners today. Marcus Aurelius never intended for his personal reflections to be, shared with the world, and yet here we are, centuries later, still finding wisdom and guidance in his words. So as you dive into Meditations, remember this. You're not just reading the words of a long-dead emperor. You're engaging in a dialogue with another human being who wrestled with life's big questions and found a path forward. Through introspection, through virtue, through this deep understanding of our shared humanity, take those insights to heart and see what they might unlock within you.